Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on the Kaleidoscope, or rather on the Sunrise. And I do have a lot of interesting and fun things to be sharing or to be talking about with you today. So make sure you stay tuned, okay? Because, like I said, there's a lot of interesting conversation that happens right here on Relax Radio. So make sure you stay tuned because you're not going to find this conversation anywhere else, okay? So make sure you do that because we have a lot of interesting conversation that I will be sharing with you all the way until 9 a.m. So it's just, the second hour of the show. That means I'll be here for an additional, or, I will be here for another hour. And until then, make sure to share your thoughts, your experiences, your opinions with me on the number 07852473473. So you can get in touch with me and share your thoughts and experiences and opinions with me because Relax Radio is all about you. It's about your thoughts, it's about what you want to share with us. So make sure you do that because I would absolutely love to hear about all of it, okay? And also, just a very quick reminder that you can, in fact, follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can definitely go follow us on our socials, and that way you can be a part of the show. You will be updated about everything that is happening in the world, and you're going to know about everything that happens not just here in the United Kingdom but all around the world. No matter where it is in the world, you will know about all of it. So make sure you stay tuned to that. Make sure you know about everything that's happening because it's important for you to be educated and informed about what is currently happening. So go do that, and also don't forget to download our app, which is available for both iOS devices and Android devices, so you can listen in from anywhere in the world at any time of the day on any device as well. Okay, so make sure you do that. But let's actually get into today's topic, which is about why the age of casual hugging could be over. Now, I know that sounds like something you didn't think about, or maybe you thought about it because, after all, it's a pandemic. That means we've had a lot of time to think about all of the things that you want to think about and that you don't want to think about as well. So, it almost seems like because of the pandemic, we can't actually do some of the things that we used to do. And one of those things actually happened to be hugging, something that a lot of us love to do because I don't know, for me, I feel like hugging is a way you connect with people. It's just, I don't know, your way of sharing humanity. I guess it's just how you share the fact that you're both human, you have emotions, you have struggles. I For me, that's how I always see hugging, it's just this way of people coming together. So obviously that's what I think it is, but it could be different for you. You can let me know what you think hugging is about on our number, which is 07852473473. And to get back into this conversation about hugging, to get back into why hugging is important, or why it could be over, and why a lot of people, or why a lot of us are actually not really affected but we miss hugging. We'll talk about all of that right here on the Sunrise. Now, social hugging obviously is ubiquitous. You can find it everywhere, and for most of us, it never occurred for any of us to question that practice, right? Because obviously, it was a normal thing to do. We considered it was normal, and we assumed, when you meet someone, when you meet a friend or you meet someone from your family, the first thing you do is hug them. So obviously it was very normalized and we never thought anything about it. But right now, things are changing. The world out there is changing and things are different for a lot of us. So even though you or I, we hugged people frequently, when we were much younger, that is actually not the norm right now, because at that time when we were growing up, that was the norm. Hugging people, hanging out with people, that was norm. But right now that's not the norm, because obviously, one, the pandemic, but second, also because of this thing called consent, which is very, very important, and a lot of us don't actually, we haven't paid attention to consent, or we've never thought about it seriously, because it has never occurred to us to ask people for permission, right? But right now that's not the case. For you to do anything, you need to get consent, and in a way that is something good as well, because you have no right to touch anyone or anything without their permission. Okay, that is important. Consent is important. So we will be talking about all of that. We will be talking about how these norms have changed, how the way we grew up and the way kids currently, but and the way the kids are currently growing up right now are very, very different, and what that actually means and why it's so important for us to discuss all of these things. Now, like I said, what I consider normal versus what you consider normal could be completely different. And that's understandable because we grow up in different backgrounds, right? For example, if you grow up in a suburban background with a lot of money and a lot of privilege, then you know what you consider normal is definitely not going to be the same for someone who doesn't grow up in an area like that. Especially if you come from an area that is poverty stricken, if you come from an area where there are a lot of people of color or whatnot, things are very, very different for different people, depending on your race, sometimes depending on your gender, things do happen, things do work differently. And no matter how much we try to say it doesn't, well, the truth is it does. As much as you try to deny it, that's the truth. It does happen. So because of the way we grow up, we all grow up in different backgrounds. So what we consider normal is different to what someone else considers normal. And like most of these things that were norms back then, like hugging, holding hands, or whatever, a lot of those norms were, which involved a lot of physical, or rather close physical contact, a lot of those actually stopped because of COVID-19, because the pandemic was just decided to come and, tell, hey, you know what, you can't do all those things you used to do with your friends. You can't hug them, you can't hold them, you can't be with them. So basically, that's what COVID did. And because of all the safety reasons that were surrounding us and all of those, extra precautions that we had to take, we obviously needed to take those steps and not hug people and to keep our distance from people as well. Now, in an instant, what happened is the pandemic, in fact, offered us a crash course on how to navigate each other's comfort zones and personal space bubbles, at least for all those people who actually cared about following the rules. Okay. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is because a lot of us didn't take these things seriously, right? A lot of us were, whenever we were asked to socially distance or whatnot, nobody really cared about it, or everyone was just like, oh, you know what, like everyone else is going to do it, so why should I do it? So that's a problem. I think that's a problem with us humans. Whenever we're asked to do something for our own good, we just refuse to do it. It's just like, no, I don't want to do it. Yeah, it's good for me, but no, I don't want to do it. Why are we like that? I've had this question so many times through the course of the pandemic. Why is it that we always have to do the exact opposite of what we're told to do? Is it reverse psychology? Is it some other thing in our heads that whenever people ask us to do something, we just have to do the exact opposite of it? I don't know what it is, but that's just how we're wired. Whenever someone asks you to do something, you do the exact opposite of it. So that was the case for a lot of these COVID regulations as well. When you were asked to do something, you didn't do it. And it that's just how that's another reason why the pandemic got much worse, because when we don't do things we're asked to do, and especially when it comes from a place of authority, like the health officials who know what is happening, when they tell us it's off, even when they tell us, we don't listen to them. So that is kind of why the situation got quite bad in the United Kingdom as well. But right now things are much much better. So that's something to be grateful for as well. So what happened though was because of COVID, all of these things had to be stopped. Things changed a lot. And this whole feeling of a hug, the seeds of a hug reckoning had already been planted, and that was well before social distancing became a part of daily life. Now, COVID-19 actually brought up these conversations about touch and consent, and they in fact hit a tipping point. Now, let me tell you why, okay? Because before the pandemic, before all of this, there was a lot of discourse, especially on social media about consent. Now, a lot of people don't understand how important consent is. They don't understand why it's important to ask people for permission before they do something to them. Sometimes it can be something, simple, like I don't know, braiding their hair, or even giving them a hug. It can be things as simple like that, but it's important that we ask people for consent, because like I said, it's very easy in this day and age to completely forget the fact that some people might be uncomfortable. And let's look at why people are uncomfortable about other people touching them, or if why people are uncomfortable when people don't ask them for permission. Because the truth is, no one would like if, I mean, literally nobody would like it if someone did something to you without asking you. If someone just decided to come braid your hair, you would find that annoying. I would find it annoying. Forget about like other things. Forget about other people. If you take yourself, for instance, you would obviously find it annoying, right? No one likes to be touched on. No one likes things done to them without their consent, and that has also been a very important. It has in fact been an important factor when we're talking about a lot of other things. Especially when you want to be in a relationship, when you're trying to sort of navigate your way through life. Consent is very, very important. And regardless of what kind of relationship you have with, people, whether, regardless of whether it's your family, regardless of whether it's your significant other or your best friend, you still need to ask them for consent. Just because you're friends with them, that doesn't mean you're entitled to do things to them without their permission, because we need to understand that other people are their own individual people. We have no sense of control over them, or we don't have any control over them, because they don't belong to us. Nobody belongs to anyone, and we're our own people. So we need to ask for consent before we do anything. And that's why when the pandemic came along, it in fact exacerbated these conversations, because the pandemic made people consider what they were doing. Before you hug that person, you would always think, okay, should I do this? It's a pandemic. Am I supposed to do this? I'll ask them if they want to hug. If not, I'll just stay away from them. By the way, you are not supposed to hug during the pandemic. So if you did that, you weren't, you're putting yourself and a lot of other people in a lot of danger as well. Okay. So make sure you keep that in mind. But going back into this conversation about consent, it's important that when we are, when we meet people, when we hang out with people, that whatever it is that we do, we always ask for consent. Okay. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be for, physical touch or whatever. Sometimes it can be things like, oh, can I talk to you about a problem? Are you in the correct headspace to listen to me talk about my problem? Because we might not know, but a lot of other people might be going through a lot of other different problems that they might not be sharing with us, which is why it's important to always ask people, can I open up to you? Can I tell you this now? Are you in an okay headspace to listen to me talk about my problem? Can I hug you because I want to feel confident? It's important to always ask those questions. Okay. So make sure you stay tuned, because we will be back to talk about everything important. We will be back to talk about all of that after this small break. But until then, make sure you stay tuned.
and it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Girls, ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking. You want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts, mainly one because they're nice and bright, so they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay.
They're
But yeah,
nice.
that's very important, right? Because
Very
you want
important,
cars. Yeah.
Very important. And also, like people see me in like calves, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Girls, ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, I'm super excited to be here because we're talking about a lot of very, very interesting things. A lot of interesting things that's definitely going to educate you, but also a lot of interesting things that are going to make you think, make you really think twice about whether what you're doing is correct and whether you are doing what other people would find comfortable. That's why we're talking about consent, we're talking about hugging, we're talking about everything that the pandemic everything that we had to stop rather because of the pandemic. So that's what we're talking about. Now make sure you stay tuned because we have a lot of other fun and interesting content heading your way. But obviously for you to find out all of that, you need to stay tuned, and you also need to tune into or rather you need to follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that way you can actually be a part of this conversation. You can always keep yourself informed, and you will absolutely be the first, or rather you would be the first to know about everything that happens all around in the world. So make sure you do that, and also make sure to follow us on our or rather make sure to download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That way you can listen in from any device you want at any time of the day. And make sure to drop me a text on 078 because like I said, I would absolutely love to hear your experience. I would love to hear your thoughts. So make sure you do that. But right now, let's get back into the conversation we were having about COVID-19 and why the age of casual hugging rather has might not exist anymore. Why it has to be stopped as well. That's what we're talking about. Now, like I said, COVID-19 actually brought about these conversations about touch and consent. All these conversations that existed about touch and consent actually exacerbated, and people started paying more attention to all of these things because of COVID-19. Now, for example, if I talk to you about millennials remembered who remembered to hug or rather who remembered being expected to hug everyone at their childhood family reunions had in fact begun reconciling their politics with their parenting, and introduced this semi controversial idea that nobody, not even your grandparents, are entitled to hug their children, your grandchildren without the child's permission. Okay, so as controversial as it is, it's also a very important conversation that needs to be had, right? And that is exactly what millennials right now are doing as well. That nobody, literally nobody, can actually hug you or touch you or do anything without your permission. Now, if we take all of this together, we're actually looking at a very different era for hugs than when all of this than back then. You know, things have changed so much. Things are definitely much, much different than it used to be. So in the time since everything was normal, in the time since, you know, people used to hug a lot and whatnot, and especially during COVID, we've actually had an opportunity to reflect on our collective, norms and social patterns. We've been able to sort of analyze, take a step back and relax and actually analyze all of these social patterns that we have been taught about. You know, if we've definitely had to sit back and really think about some of those norms that we had, because they were in fact very controversial. You know, some of them didn't actually make a lot of sense, and you know, a lot of those patterns that existed really made you reconsider some of the things that you were teaching your children and some of the values that you were inculcating in your children as well. Now, however, now, you know, you actually have the time to actually decide how we have to move forward and how we need to move forward with hugging, because you know, there's also all of these conversations about consent, you know, about why consent is important, and we need to sort of have this conversation and figure out if we are going to go back to hugging, and when our communities reopen, if we want to continue hugging at all, right? That's a very, very important question that we all need to ask as well. Now, a lot of people in fact welcome hugs with a warm embrace, and I am one of them, but obviously I will tell you the story of someone else as well. Now, a lot of people who were huge huggers back in the day, by when I say back in the day, I mean, you know, before the pandemic. So a lot of us were huge huggers back in the day, and we used to embrace hugging deeply as well. Now, one of them is actually Sabrina Osborne, who lives in Gary, Indiana. Okay, and she says that she's always been very affectionate towards friends and family. And she's also 42 years old, and she's a new mom who lives all the way in Indiana. But what's important to understand is that while she's always been very affectionate towards her family, it's also been a part of her love language. Hugging is basically a physical affirmation, right? Now, for me too, you know, hugging, physical touch is basically my love language, right? So I love to hug people. You know, I love to, you know, pat people on the head, especially when they're crying. That's the way I comfort people. But what's important is I need to, or it's not just even me, you yourself need to ask people for permission before you do that, because that is what COVID-19 has taught us as well. We need to ask people for consent. Rather, we need to ask people if they're okay with us touching them or us hugging them, right? And going back to the story of Sabrina Osman, even though she is fully vaccinated, she hasn't resumed hugging everyone just yet. And I think we all know the reason why. Because even though we're vaccinated, and people who've had double doses of the vaccine, you know, they definitely have a higher immunity than most of us. It doesn't mean that we just want to jump into the deep end without actually, you know, learning how to swim, okay? Because we need to make sure that when we start hugging people, that it's safe. You know, because right now, even though we've been vaccinated, even though things are slowly starting to get back to normal, it doesn't mean that we need to rush into it and that we need to make decisions based on you know, our recklessness. It's always good to overthink things like this and make a proper decision, a rational decision, if I put it that way, to make sure that not only your family but also you and your friends and everyone around you is safe. So it's very, very important to remember those, or rather keep those things in mind if you're going to hug someone again. And also, in terms of you know, society and everything, socially it's a little bit more awkward than it used to be. And that is also because you don't know who's vaccinated and you don't know who's not vaccinated. And especially in her case, she's a new mom, right? So she's a newborn child that she needs to take care of, and if she does hug, you know, sometimes some of the germs that might be there on that person might end up, it might end up in her child's body. And obviously, as a mother, you want to protect your child. You don't want to put your child at risk. So obviously, that is another reason why she is, you know, rethinking, uncertain about hugging people. And she said, though, that she's very, very glad that she's reintroducing some more touch into her life. Okay, and believe me, so am I. I love hugging people, and I have to say, I've missed hugging people so, so much. Okay, but also I think in a way it teaches us a lot as well, because we sort of learn and we begin to understand that we're completely fine. We don't always have to hug people, we don't always have to do all of these social norms to be considered normal. How that's just how society works. You need to be a part of all these social norms, you have to be a part of all these trending things for people to consider you as normal. But like, sometimes you don't even have the effort to do that because you're so busy. I am one of those people. So yeah, welcome to the club, join the club, I guess. But that's what it is now. Going back into this conversation, um going back into how socially right now as well, it's a bit awkward to hug people. Sometimes, even though things are slowly starting to get back to normal, and we're slowly, starting to interact with people more, it sort of feels like filling up an empty tank of gas. Okay, because that's what it feels like when you have a real genuine hug. And when you haven't hugged people for so long, then it feels really, really weird, because you haven't been in contact with people for a long time, right? So obviously hugging them and socializing with them the same way that you used to is a bit awkward, because things are definitely much, much different than it used to be. And another thing that we need to keep in mind is also there are a lot of scientific reasons as to why we crave embraces. There's scientific reasons as to why we want to be embraced and why we want love and why we want to be hugged. So it's, I think, also something else that it means is, it means, or rather what it means is, you can feel and understand what it means to be human, and what it means to be social and to be connected to other people. This was actually said by Helena Bosling, who is a physiologist that studies the human tactile system at the University of Gothenburg. So obviously, when it comes to being human, when it comes to doing these things that you used to do back then, all these things that were considered normal, like hugging, hanging out with your friends, those things are not normal anymore. The new normal is staying at home. The new normal is trying to protect your family and take care of yourself as much as possible. So there's a lot of reasons also as to why, why people, humans especially, crave embrace. There's a reason for that. Now make sure you stay tuned, because I will be talking about all of that. I will be getting into a little bit of the science also as to why humans crave hugging, or we crave embrace, and why it's important for us to have that embrace as well. But while we're discussing that, we'll also be discussing, other things like consent, and why it's important for us to ask consent from people nowadays, especially because COVID-19 has in fact furthered that conversation. COVID-19 has made us think twice about what we're doing, and it has actually made us reconsider some of the choices that we make. So I think, in a way, even though we blame COVID-19 for all the things that went wrong in 2020 and even 2021, because it's pretty obvious that the rest of this year is going to be spent like this too. I mean, come on, it's already July, right? So almost half of this, or rather a little bit more than half of this year, is over. So obviously it's going to be like this until the end of this year. But it's definitely made us adapt ourselves to what we consider the new normal. It has made us adapt ourselves to new things, different things that we all have to experience, I guess. If you look at it optimistically, this is just a way of getting on with life. This is just a new experience of life as well. So obviously, that's something good as well. As much as it is very stressful, as much as it is very annoying to think of how much the pandemic changed our lives, and we always tend to think of it in negative terms, it has also given us a lot of time to socialize with our families, especially if you were stuck with your family at home during the lockdown. Okay, but make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're going to head into a small break, and after that we will be back to talk about this conversation.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? But when you are basically going out and during a day, you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that, the rich pay less taxes, or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true that the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods. They're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends, and so forth. And then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK. We've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? Because in a public company where the stock is traded openly on the stock exchange, the value of that stock is driven by supply and demand, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by news, it's driven by quite a lot of variables over and above the actual accounting or total net worth of that company. I mean, we've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? And the company may still have value, it may still be doing quite a good things.
Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no, if that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset, And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young, well, still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much. A lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. And are you tuned into the sunrise? And it is the second hour of my show, and I'll be keeping you company all the way until 9 a.m. So make sure you stay tuned because I do have a lot of interesting and fun things to share with you today, right here on the sunrise. Now, I also want to very quickly remind you that you can, in fact, join me live. You can be a part of this conversation. All you need to do is just text me on 078 and you can be a part of this conversation. And I would absolutely love it if you could be a part of this conversation as well. Okay. And when you're a part of this conversation, you can share your thoughts, your experiences, whatever it is that you want to share with me, you can do that as well. So make sure you do that because I would absolutely love to hear from you because your opinion matters to me as well. Okay. Now you're tuned into Relax Radio where it's all about all the positives and no negatives. So you can definitely go download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store as well. And that way you can, in fact, be a part of this conversation. Okay. And also, don't forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that way you can make sure that you're listening to us, that you are a part of this conversation, and that you're contributing to this conversation as much as you can. So, we were talking about, we were definitely talking about how hugging could basically be over right now because of how things have changed, especially in the pandemic, right? Especially because we've had to make a lot of these changes. It's important that we try to make these changes. It's important that we discuss these changes rather, and it's important that we have conversations about what needs to change and why they need to change. So like I said, I told you I will be explaining the science behind why we want embraces, why we want hugs, and why as humans we crave for embrace. So we'll actually get into that conversation right now. Now, our skin is in fact meant to be there for intercommunication, basically human to human, and it connects us and makes us the human beings that we are supposed to be. So, especially when we give long, mutual, meaningful hugs, our brains release the hormone oxytocin, which calms us and strengthens social bonds. Okay, so when you hug people, when you have physical contact with people, it actually releases oxytocin, and obviously when I say when you're in contact with people, it's when you're in contact with people, okay, it's obviously not with like random people because no one wants to do that. But when you are in contact with people, when you touch someone else or when you hug someone else, it releases oxytocin from your brain, and what happens then is that it actually calms you down and it strengthens your social bond. Now, especially in a time where all stressed out, things like hugs can help us to calm down. It can help us to be much happier than we are right now. Except the one little problem is that we can't have hugs because of the pandemic. We're not supposed to hug. We're supposed to socially distance. So then there's this question, okay, if hugging calms me down, then why can't I hug? But what is cool about this is that there are a lot of other ways in which you can release oxytocin, okay? Now, if you follow us on our socials, you can actually go check it out because on TikTok, we actually have a video on how to hack the happiness chemicals. And if you want to be happy in these tough times, go check it out because that's a great way to make sure you are happy and you are less stressed out about everything that is happening in the world right now. Okay. So make sure you go check that out. But there are other ways, there are other alternatives to releasing oxytocin from in your body, right? Now, when you have been deprived of such touch, it can actually lead to skin hunger, which is a craving for a connection that can cause or exacerbate mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. And I think this is very relatable to a lot of us as well. A lot of us feel depressed and anxious because we haven't been in contact with a lot of people that we used to hang out with. So, for example, if you and your significant other used to meet often, but now y'all can't do that because of the pandemic, obviously it has made things much, much more difficult for you, right? Things have gotten harder for you, obviously, because of the fact that you can't meet your significant other. So there's no physical touch, there is no hugging, there's no embrace that you can get from them, rather, right? And if you've seen, I don't know if you've noticed this yourself, but I've noticed this in a lot of my friends who are in relationships and who used to meet their significant others quite often. They have been feeling, much a bit more depressed and a bit more anxious than they used to, because of, this skin hunger, because of this want for that embrace, because of that craving for this connection. Now, Wasling actually believes that light, non invasive touch, such as a pat on the upper arm, is actually a universal good, and that those who are comfortable with offering such forms of touch do, in fact, have a social responsibility to identify people that are lonely and that might need an extra hand on their shoulder. Okay. Now, I completely agree to that as well. When you're touching people, when you're, when you're trying to come into physical contact with people, you need to always make sure that it is light and it's non-invasive touch. Okay, obviously that means touching, something like their arm, or sometimes, a pat on the head. Things like that is non-invasive. Okay, so it's important, if you're someone who really is concerned about consent, if you're concerned about the way other people could feel when you touch them, then it's important that when you're touching them, that you do a very that you touch them in a way that is light and non-invasive, like a pat on the upper arm, and that actually will help them feel much better. So for example, if you know someone who's going through anxiety or depression and they need help, then the best way you can help them is definitely by giving them that extra hand on their shoulder, by letting them know that you are there for them. Okay, and I definitely know that when someone is going through problems, when someone is going through issues, it's important for them to actually try and it's important to try and be there for them, because when someone is going through tough times, they want someone to share that burden with, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is going to disappear, but what it does mean is that, that problem will feel like less of a burden because you have someone to share it with. So people who identify as lonely and people that might need an extra hand on their shoulder, if you are one of those people who are okay, and if you're the kind of person who loves giving hugs, then, well, you do have a social responsibility to make sure they're okay. Now, Greg Andre, who is actually a 50-year-old teacher in Swansea, Massachusetts, actually said that, or rather, he used to be a hug ambivalent. Okay, because he said he never liked hugging people he just met, or the obligation to hug people he barely knew. He absolutely hated that. He found it very, very uncomfortable, and this was actually before the pandemic. This was his pre-pandemic stance. But then he actually lost family members due to COVID, and being unable to grieve in person and being unable to grieve in community with others, it actually gave him a deeper appreciation for the emotional power of human touch. Because then he realized, when you're grieving with your community, when you're grieving with other people, and other people are holding you while you're crying, while you're expressing that grief, that actually helps you, right? Because it feels like that person understands your pain. It feels like it's an exchange of the pain between the two of you. So that is what it feels like. And in funerals, whenever you're going through sad situations, when you're crying, you would much rather cry hugging a person than hugging your pillow, right? Because that feeling that you get when you're hugging a person is completely different from the feeling that you get when you're hugging your pillow, because the pillow is not human, and whatever the pillow gives you isn't exactly what you get in a human. A human is a much better option to hug. So that actually gave him a deeper appreciation for touch, for the power of touch. And he said that when someone dies, everything you do is inadequate, and we've all felt that, right? Because we've all lost, not just during the pandemic, but also due to other reasons, we've all lost at least one family member. Even if it wasn't close family, it could have been a relative that we lost. And we all understand that when we lose people, when people die, you start feeling like you never did enough. For example, when my grandfather passed away last year, I felt like I didn't do enough. I felt like I wasn't with him enough, and I felt like I wasn't the best granddaughter I could ever be. And it really tore me apart, because I did so much, but also it felt like no matter what I did, it didn't feel like I had done enough. And it was a very, very hard time. It was a time full of grief for all of us as well, because it wasn't just me. My mom felt that too, and my siblings felt it too. So it's very common when people die, you feel like you haven't done enough for them. But at least, before the pandemic, we had this physical thing where we could try to squeeze the grief out of each other for a few seconds at a wake or even a funeral. You could do that before the pandemic. But after the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic, you couldn't actually do that. You couldn't touch people, you couldn't hug people. And that made a lot of us who weren't that okay with hugging or with like physical touch realize that physical touch or hugging is in fact very, very important, especially in this post vaccine week. I mean, I'm very grateful that I can at least get an inadequate hug. I can at least get an inadequate hug, or I can give an inadequate hug, because that for me is definitely much better than not having anything at all. And especially when you're going through these tough instances, when especially if you've lost someone, it's very, very hard. It's difficult for you to be okay without any form of physical contact, right? I mean, you want someone to hold you while you're crying. You want someone to feel that pain, feel that grief that you're trying to express, that you're trying to put out from yourself. You want someone to feel that, right? So that's why it's important, especially hugs, especially touch. That's why things like that are very, very important. So let's actually get into something else that is also known as hug hesitance, where basically people are hesitant to hug. Now that is also something, or rather hug hesitance is something that a lot of us need to come to terms with as well. Now, while a lot of us crave for physical touch, a lot of us want to be embraced and whatnot, um there are other people out there who don't actually want that. There are other people out there who don't like hugging, who want their personal space, sort of thing. And I've come across a few people like that too, but that's just what they wish. So we need to respect that. We need to respect their wishes as well. So keeping that in mind, when people are hesitant when it comes to hugs, it's very, very important for you to keep that in mind and respect their wishes. But I will get back into this conversation in a few minutes after this small break. So until then, make sure you stay tuned.
Climb Mount Everest. That is one of that's in my bucket list. You're laughing, but that is the facts right there. I'd love to do that. That is something I'm looking forward to do, hopefully.
Climb Everest.
Mount Everest. I mean, okay, not the very tip of Mount Everest, maybe the base camp at least.
You're talking about mental health. Well, if you went out and got some exercise in the fresh air, that would improve your mental health. It will make you feel better.
That's true. That is true. I wholeheartedly agree. But then for some people, it's how do you find the motivation to, especially when it comes to riding a bicycle, to do it again and again and again and again? It's a cycle that you have to be used to. How do you do it? What makes you wake up in the morning and decide, hey, I'm going to pick my bike up today. I'm going to cycle. What makes you want to do that?
What makes me want to do that?
Yeah. What do you like? What could you give listeners, like people listening in right now? What kind of tip could you give them?
Well, the first tip I would give them, if you haven't tried it before, try it. It can open up new horizons. It will make you fitter. It will definitely make you fitter. Cycling is one of the best forms of aerobic exercise you can do.
It sounds like, I mean, if you think about it, yeah, it sounds like great fun. Because what essentially you're trying to say is also at the same time, when you, if you look at it from this perspective, with regards to mental health, especially when you look at it with mental health, this is another way to fight it. I feel like you go outside, you meet more people, you interact with, socially, you will interact with more people, and you're keeping fit, you're making connections, you're breathing in the good and exhaling the bad. I feel like that's a great thing right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got a better way with words than I have, I'll tell you. But you're quite right. What you say there. You're quite right.
I mean, I've been doing this for quite some time. I mean, hey, you'll get the hang of it.
I've been doing it for about 10 minutes now, so yeah.
That I can never really understand people staying in one room the whole day when you can have the world to see. I am a traveler. I travel. I love traveling. Traveling is just one of the things I do. And yeah, on top of my bucket list was, to one time, hopefully when I get there, go to Nepal and climb Mount Everest. That is one of that's in my bucket list. You're laughing, but that is the facts right there. I'd love to do that. That is something I'm looking forward to do, hopefully.
Climb Everest.
Mount Everest. Okay, not the very tip of Mount Everest, maybe the base camp at least.
Base camp, yeah.
At least.
Would you be able to cycle there?
Oh.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Super excited to be here because we're talking about how the age of casual hugging could be over because of the pandemic. Now, that is a very interesting topic, something that we were talking about a while back as well. And I'm very, very interested to be here and share my thoughts with you because I also want to know your thoughts and what you think about this as well. So make sure you do that because I would absolutely love to hear what your thoughts are and what you feel about this and how you felt, especially in the middle of the pandemic when you had to give up hugging, as just like me. Okay, so make sure you share that with me because I would absolutely love to hear about it, and I would love to hear what you think about it as well. Now, to get back into this conversation, we need to talk about hug hesitance. We need to talk about how not a lot of people are okay with hugs. So, what do we do now? While a lot of us return, or a lot of us welcome the return of social hugging, some of us will actually emerge from the pandemic with a lingering aversion to excessive physical touch, and this means that we'll have whole new caveats with whether a hug is acceptable, especially for people outside our inner circles. And this is an important question, right? Because even though we're comfortable with hugging people we know or we are in close contact with, or people we're close to, that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be okay with hugging people who we barely know, right? Because when it comes to the kind of germs that they carry, we don't know where they have been, what they have been through, so we don't know what exactly, or we don't know what kind of germs are there in their bodies. And we know whenever we go out, wherever we go, whether it's the restaurant or the supermarket, there's always so many different types of microorganisms in the air and in the environment around us. So that means that it could potentially be on our bodies as well. So that means that when we're hugging other people who are not a part of our normal social circles, we will be hesitant about it, right? Now, the health officer of British Columbia actually floated the idea of instituting a post pandemic hug day. um and she wanted to do this in her in her province of in her province, right? Now there's apparently this Vancouver area law student who had a very negative physical reaction to it, because look, let's be honest, even though it's a post pandemic, how many of us would actually be okay with hugging complete strangers? Because I definitely wouldn't. I love hugging, I love hugs, but I would definitely not hug a bunch of people on what is supposed to be a hug day, because I don't know where those people are from. I don't know where they've been as well. Now, and the other thing is, when we're hugging people, we obviously want that hug to be meaningful, right? No one wants to have a hug that doesn't have any meaning. We don't want meaningless hugs, right? And it's important that it's important that after this pandemic we begin to realize that hugging needs to be something that we really really think about before we do it, because like I said, we don't know where people have been, we don't know where they have gone. So for our safety and for their safety as well, we need to make sure that we are in fact focusing on ourselves, and we're focusing on protecting our families and whatnot as well. Okay. Now, Brandon Harris, who's actually a 29-year-old student affairs coordinator, actually believes that the pandemic gave us all practical public health lesson. Okay. And that is, indiscriminate hugging can spread illness. Okay. So if we keep continuing these COVID safety measures in place, even after the pandemic, if we still keep continuing it, and we just still we keep physical distancing, and we keep wearing a mask when we're sick, or even during specific seasons like autumn and winter, there would be less people being sick. Now, especially in Japan, if you show any symptoms of being sick, if you show any symptoms of having a cough or a cold, the first thing they do is they actually wear a mask. And that's not just for their safety or whatnot, it's also for the safety of other people. It's like, when we first started wearing masks, it was just to protect us from COVID, right? But in Japan, this was already happening, because during flu season, if you caught the flu, you would wear a mask to make sure that you protected other people around you as well. So again, in terms of that, it's important that we begin to understand that if you feel sick, if you are regardless of whether it's COVID or any other seasonal flu, it's always important that you take these additional safety measures. Okay. Now, reducing the practice of hugs actually mean that there'll be gentler cold and flu seasons in the future as well. So how exactly do we navigate this brave new world of hugs, right? To minimize awkwardness and confusion around physical touch in post-pandemic social situations, it's very very important to understand boundary setting, not merely as only a defensive position, but also as a courtesy you can offer when you are approaching someone. Okay. People quite often respond to implicit social pressure by compromising their boundaries, like accepting a hug that they really didn't want, just so that they're polite. So huggers can actually preempt such discomfort by simply asking, are you okay with a hug? Can I give you a hug? And it's very very important that we ask these questions, and we make sure that when we are hugging people, that we don't make them feel uncomfortable as well, because it's important for us to understand the necessity of centering other people's physical and emotional boundaries. It's not just about us, it's about other people as well. And the best way to actually ask people about their boundaries is just to ask them explicitly, like, hey, are you okay with this? Can I do this? Because otherwise, you're not actually going to know anything about them. And when you ask them explicitly, they're going to say no thanks, or yes, or great, I would love a hug. And then how you would respond to that is simply by saying, okay, I respect that, and that is the end of the conversation. You really don't have to make it awkward and be like, please, can I give you a hug? I want to give you a hug. When someone says no once, it's no. It doesn't mean that just because you ask that question multiple times over and over that they're going to change that answer. When someone says no the first time, it means no. Okay, so it's important to keep those things in mind, especially if if you want to hug people, if you want to hug random strangers, you can do that, but just make sure you're safe, you take the necessary precautions, and that you ask those important questions that you need to be asking. Boundary setting is important, consent is important, and it can actually be an act of love for someone. regardless of whether it's, a platonic relationship or a romantic relationship, that you ask them if they're okay with with a hug, or if they're okay with physical touch. So it's important to keep those things in mind, but make sure you stay tuned, because I will actually be back in a few minutes to talk to you about how hope can feel very, very dangerous in a pandemic, and how exactly do we build happiness by focusing on small delights. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned, because I will be back